Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I'm glad that you can be with me on this. You could be anywhere this morning, and it just so happened, for whatever particular reason, that I found yourself here, and I appreciate you for being here. We have a damn good show for you today, a full show for you today, a jam-packed, bursting at the seams show for you today. We're going to have the one and only, the man himself, Scott Ritter. He is going to be on the show. Robert Fatima. He's a legal guy. He's going to get into some of the things that Donald Trump has been doing in regards to executive orders. The one and only Mark Frost. We are going to get into some of the economic news with Mark Frost, especially with Trump throwing around this idea of sanction this person and sanction that person. We're going to sanctions for you and sanctions for you. Okay, yeah, there are consequences for that. Sanctions are taxes. And I know they don't necessarily want to deal with that, being Republicans, but sanctions are taxes. There's that. Also, we have this bizarre, I don't know another word for it, ultimatum threat that Donald Trump is aiming at Vladimir Putin. It seems that Donald Trump has become so accustomed to dealing with weak people and weak countries and vassal states that when he's finally dealing with a peer that doesn't really care about his threats. And that's not entirely true. Putin cares about his threats, but he cares about his threats in a different way than, say, Greenland or, say, Denmark. Denmark is terrified that Trump will just take Greenland because Denmark knows that they can't do anything about it. Ultimately, the only thing they can do is prostrate themselves. How high do you need my ass to be, sir? That's the best that they can do. That's the most aggressive take that Denmark can take. Please, sir, how far does my ass need to be in the air? This high? That's the best Greenland can do. That's the best Denmark can do. If you're dealing with Europe and you say, hey, you need to give me more money for NATO, 5% now. I need you to do 5%. Well, you know that is going to fundamentally destroy their economies. And again, the best that they could say is, we need to cut our social programs because Donald Trump now wants 5%. This is not that. The concern that Russia has is this fool is going to end the world. Those are different concerns. I hope you understand. It's not, I'm afraid of the US. It's, I'm afraid of what you're going to create. I'm afraid of the situation that you're going to end us up in. You are going to end us up in a third world war. You are not accepting the reality of events the way the reality is presented on the ground. You have zero capability to do anything in this situation. Yes, you can escalate to a nuclear war, but then again, we're in a nuclear war. It's that. That's a different threat. That's a different concern. That was the same concern with Joe Biden or any American president for that matter. I'm not afraid of you that you can beat me on the battlefield. This is existential for us. So at the end of the day, we're going to do any and everything required to win this, even if we need to go to the border of Poland. If you F around and find out, then the entire world will be at stake. Those are different concerns. I hope you understand what I mean. One is weak. The other one is, oh God. It's that. Those are very different things. The concern of Russia is the latter. The concern of Europe is the former because they're weak. There's also this other veiled threat, I don't know what else to call it, that was aimed at Joe Biden, where he pointed out that Joe Biden pardoned all of these people. And maybe Joe Biden should have pardoned himself. Now, the moment that you hear that, you're like, whoa, hell does that mean? Hell does that mean? Are they trying to throw Joe Biden in the cage? Is that what's happening? Is that what's happening? Now, again, Trump could just be talking because Trump talks a lot. But you would imagine that it is kind of true that Joe Biden pardoned all of his family members. And yet, the guy that maybe he should have pardoned was himself. I mean, he did a pardon for Hunter Biden going all the way back since the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict. And if I'm not mistaken, the pardon for Fauci also goes back to the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict. And you have to ask yourself, that's a hell of a long pardon. That's a hell of a long pardon. And why does it need to go back to the Ukraine conflict? Are these things somehow related to one another in regards to criminality in the Ukrainian conflict? Any way you look at it, it's dicey. That's all. Democrats at the point were saying, well, if you got to pardon somebody, it makes them look guilty. Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I get the concern, right? Oh, Republicans are going to go on a witch hunt. Like, they went on a witch hunt against Trump, which is a bit rich, right? It's like, I'm going to call you what we are actually doing. It is a way of inoculating ourselves for our own criminality. Fair enough. Frankly, this whole Biden influence peddling operation thing has been going on for decades. And if indeed they start looking into Ukraine, which they should, by the way, a functioning government would look into the Ukraine issue. They spent nearly $300 billion. Why wouldn't you look into this kind of grift when somebody's spending this much money to ensure that people weren't stealing that money? Because if you're spending $300 billion and you lose $1 billion, is anybody really going to notice? Will anybody notice $1 billion being lost when you're spending that much money, when you're throwing that much money out of helicopters? It's hard for me to believe that all of that money is going to be accounted for. And even further, it's hard for me to believe that somebody's hand is not in the cookie jar. And part of what Joe Biden may be doing with these pardons is trying to inoculate himself, his family, and anybody else that may have had their hand in the cookie jar as they've gone with this grift of this war. So yes, in any functioning government, you would be doing an accounting of the Ukrainian boondoggle, as I'm going to call it. Because again, it's a conflict that never needed to take place. And not just never needed to take place, has gotten all of these people killed to the tune of 1 million people. It is outrageous that they were able and willing to do this. And yet, here we are. And the man who said that he was going to be conciliatory, the man who decided to moderate his language on the issue, effectively saying, yes, expansion of NATO was always a red line. Now he's flipped his wig and he wants to play this, I'm going to be strong and then I'm going to negotiate. Okay, good luck with that. Oh, I don't know if I introduced the other guests. I think I jumped in the middle of it. Richard Solomon is going to be here. He is a libertarian socialist. He'll explain. He's been on the show once before. This was a long time ago. But we'll see what he is up to recently. And we have Daniel McAdams. Daniel McAdams is also going to go into some of the, let's say, executive orders that Donald Trump has been issuing. Because keep in mind, Donald Trump is sitting at a desk doing order after order after order after order. In one sense, it's interesting. I mean, how can I say this? Because I don't want to be misunderstood. I firmly think Trump, especially for my own political framing, is going to be doing some horrible stuff. And my expectation was for Trump to do horrible stuff. I had no expectation of Donald Trump doing good things in that office. So there's that. The only thing that I wanted of anything in the wars, meaning if you were going to make a promise to say, I'm going to end these wars and start them, then do that. End these wars. Don't start those wars. That is the thing that I was, okay, just do that. I rarely get anything out of presidents. And when a president says something that I actually like to hear, which in the context of these wars. So he is going to be doing a lot of horrible stuff. I just get your mind right. Right? Like when you go into the doctor's office, and you know they're going to get an IV. Or better yet, when you go to the doctor's office and you know the doctor's going to say, Mr. Thomas, I need you to pull your pants down. I need to check your balls. Okay, you just got to accept that, right? You just got to go in knowing some really cringy stuff is about to take place. Just got to accept it. That's the way I feel about Trump. There's gonna be horrible things that take place. But that being said, there is something correct about a president coming in the office with a clear vision of what they want. Like, it's not that I like the vision. The vision is going to be grotesque. But there is something good. And again, I don't want to be misunderstood. This is going to be grotesque. But the notion that the president has an idea, a vision of, I want to get in office and I want to do X, Y, and Z. And on the day I get in, I am going to be immediately on the job doing X, Y, and G, even when it's going to be completely and utterly grotesque. At the very least, he had a vision for it. That's not something I guess about Joe Biden, who comes across at this point like a placeholder and not even a good placeholder. So there is that. I'm going to get into the Russia stuff when Scott comes in because I don't want to repeat. But there is a fascinating clip. There is a fascinating clip of Donald Trump leaning into John Bolton. Now, obviously, Trump is not like John Bolton. And he has called him a warmonger. He's trashed him. He's called him stupid. He's called him everything but a child of God. But Bolton doesn't like Trump all that much either. So fair enough, right? But at one of the press conferences, Trump is asked about removing his security clearance from Bolton. In fact, he removed his security clearance from the 51 intelligence officials because, after all, those intelligence officials effectively lied, and they could try to do all of the, revisionist history of, well, we didn't really say it was Russian. It was a Russian laptop. We said whatever. You knew very clearly what you were trying to insinuate, that the laptop from Hunter Biden came from the Russians and was Russian disinformation. Don't lie after the fact and tell people, hey, I know when we showed you that spoon, it really wasn't a spoon. No, the spoon was actually a spoon in this case. And so Trump, in retaliation, which I actually approve, eliminated their security clearances. God bless them. I love it. It's trolling to nobody's business. And so all of these people were pissed off. So apparently John Bolton found out about this at like 3 a.m. or something. That he got the heads up that his security clearances had been removed. I think that's right. Wait a minute. I'm going to show the clip. Because Trump leans into him. Yeah. All right. So Bolton was they woke Bolton up at 12:01 a.m. January 21st, and Secret Service told him that Donald Trump had removed his security clearance and his protective detail would be leaving. I'll go back to that because I hear my guests. And I want to get to him. The one and only Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, welcome back, man. How you doing? You doing all right?
I'm doing good, thank you. Yourself?
I am doing good. Better that you were with me. A little dragging ass this morning, but I'm all right. Just rough night. I want to get your take on something. So the man who got in office saying he was going to end the war in 24 hours. Well, 24 hours has passed. The war is not ended, but fair enough. I never believed that in the first place. So let's put that to the side. Donald Trump, when he was given this kind of press conference, this was when he first got in. He was talking about NATO being a red line. It was always going to be a problem. And he gave people like me who was questioning whether or not Trump was going to actually work towards ending the war, whether he was going to actually do that. And I thought to myself, all right, good. He's framing his language in a way that allows a context to try to end this war. Because everybody else was saying nonsense. Putin wants to take 150,000 people and overthrow all of Europe. It's like, okay, this is stupid. So at the very least, by acknowledging NATO expansion was always a red line. Hell, even go back to Yeltsin, who was a patsy for Bill Clinton. Even for Yeltsin, it was a red line. And then Trump comes out with an ultimatum to Putin. And in this ultimatum, he says, I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people and always had a good relationship with President Putin. And this despite the radical left's Russia hoax. We must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War. Okay, first I want to stop there. Russia didn't help us win the Second World War. Russia lost like 30, 40 million people in that war in order to destroy Nazism. So to say, well, the U.S. who lost, what, 200,000, 300,000, whatever that number was, compared to the 40 million, it's just absurd, just obnoxious and absurd. But I'm sorry, let's keep going. It says, we must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. All that being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing, and President Putin a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high level of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never should have started, if I were president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and make it easy. It's always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. This is one of the most ludicrous and ridiculous statements that could ever come out of Trump's mouth. And Trump has said a lot of stupid stuff, and this has to be one of the dumbest. I want your take on this. Is this level of ultimatum going to work? And I'm going to just, your take in general on his tweet.
Well, it, of course, is a ridiculous tweet or post. I don't know what we call them nowadays, zeets or something. They're whatever the term is for X. But let's also be honest. All this is it brings together things that Trump has been saying ever since it became clear, even before it became clear that he wasn't going to get it done in 24 hours and all this. Trump did say if Putin doesn't want to make a deal, then we're going to pour resources into Ukraine. He said that. That's always been, one of his options. His Secretary of Treasury nominee has said, Russia's economy isn't doing great, and we can crush it through sanctions. We can, there's more things we could do with the oil, and we can sanction India and China and the people that Russia sells oil to, and so there's things that we can do there. And then he has been, saying even before this ultimatum that Russia lost 1 million people, 1 million men, and
clip too.
Ukraine lost 700,000, but Russia lost 1 million, and it's just not going well for him. So, two things. One, the ignorance of Trump on anything dealing with Russia is manifest, and we know that Donald Trump's not a Russian expert, but surely as the president, he could surround himself with people who are knowledgeable about it. I mean, to give you an example, he made a decision to repost, segments from Jeffrey Sachs about Israel. But Jeffrey Sachs has also been speaking out quite eloquently and accurately about Russia. So we know that he has access to things. I don't expect him to follow me or listen to me, but if he had, he wouldn't say any of the stupidity that he just said. Again, I'm just going to say this just in case somebody's watching. Okay, I don't want credit. We can fix everything because what you're doing is stupid. And here comes the crux of it, the hard way. Well, there's going to be a hard way, Mr. President. The hard way is you're going to get your ass handed to you on a plate. All right, what you're talking about here is not going to work. Not only is it not going to work, the arrogance that you're showing going in is going to get you in a trap of your own making. You see, Russia has been preparing for an idiot like you ever since the special military operation began. You don't have to be called Donald Trump. You don't have to be called Joe Biden. You're just an American idiot who knows nothing about Russia. See, we're a nation that has been, and he hints at it. This is what I don't understand. He talks about the Russia hoax. All right, if you're going to say that, I know why you said it, Mr. President, because you're stupid, and you basically have made this all about you. Oh, poor me. It was the Russia hoax. But why did the Russia hoax take place? Because of Russophobia. Do you know why this Democratic-controlled Congress was able to get away what they did for as long as they did? Because of the ignorance of the American people, of the American establishment, of the people that surround you about Russia. So you don't know anything about Russia. You think you know Putin? You don't know Putin. I think maybe you do know a little bit about Putin, but you're not admitting it. Because I saw the photographs and the video of you coming out of the room with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki in 2000, what was it, 18.
Yeah.
And you were a beaten little puppy.
Yeah.
You weren't Donald Trump shouldering his way through a NATO crowd. You're a beaten little puppy, bowed down. I've been reading people for a long time, Mr. President. You were a beaten little puppy because Vladimir Putin just wasn't playing your game. And Vladimir Putin, and if you saw Putin walk out, shoulders back, he came up, he controlled that podium because Putin is confident. Putin is everything you're not. Putin is smart. Putin is clever. He's well informed, and he has a plan and a strategy. If you want to do this the hard way, you're going to find that your economy is going to collapse. What are you going to do? You're going to sanction. You're talking about sanctioning the world. You're going to tariff the world. You're clearly not an economist. I'm not saying that you can't have tariffs, and I'm not saying there isn't a role for tariffs in your economic strategy, etc. But to come out and say that you're just going to blanket tariff everything, well, where are you going to get your uranium from? It begins with a U-R-A-N-I-U. Look it up, Mr. President. It's what's used to make the fuel that goes in nuclear reactors. Somebody will explain what a nuclear reactor is to you at some point in time, but it makes energy so the lights come on in your house and other people's houses too. Where are you going to get that, Mr. President, if you sanction the hell out of it from Russia? Because Russia right now is the only source of uranium you got. And we can go on and on. I mean, you want to build airplanes? We're going to have huge American airplanes. It's beautiful. The American industry is going to be so huge and wonderful. You know, airplanes use this thing called titanium. Where are you going to get your titanium, Mr. President? And we can go do this all day long. Let me throw another one at you. Where are you going to get your oil? We're self-sufficient. I'd take another look at that, Mr. President, because you're not as self-sufficient as you think. And, you know, there's a little game going on right now where, you know, we don't buy Russian oil unless it goes through India. And then we buy it. We have no choice but to buy it because our refineries, again, it's where they take the raw oil, Mr. President, and they break it down and they make different products. Our refineries down in the Gulf Coast, they're geared to use this high sulfuric content oil that comes out of Venezuela. And we don't buy that anymore because you sanctioned them. It's not just your fault. We've been doing it for a while. But when you, Mr. President, you remember this one, don't you, Mr. President, when you shut it down, what did you do? You bought Russian oil. Why? Because the Russians have a version of Ural crude that is about the same mixture that we can run through our refineries without spending billions of dollars to fix the refineries up. But then when we shut down and said we're not buying it direct, we didn't have any oil to put into our refineries. Oh, no, Mr. President. So what did we do? We bought it from India. Or we were doing stupid tricks like having tankers come out and cross-loading it to come in and pretend that it wasn't from Russia. Mr. President, your advisors are idiots. They're wrong. 60 million, where'd you get that number, Mr. President? Let's just start with that. Because if you can't get a basic number right about how many people the Soviet Union lost in World War II, then we know you're wrong about everything. It was about 27 million, Mr. President. That's the number that the Russians have embraced. And I'm not going to challenge the Russians on how many people they lost in the conflict, but they didn't lose 60 million. They lost a lot. And as you said, Jaramal, you know, the Russians sort of beat the Germans. They did, 60, 70% of the heavy lifting for taking down Nazi Germany. So, man, it just, we can go on and on. Russia's not losing the war, Mr. President. Keith Kellogg may be a brave guy. I'm not ever going to denigrate his courage because in Vietnam, he won a Silver Star for running out under heavy enemy fire to rescue his wounded men. And he deserves to wear that medal, and we deserve to shake his hand and buy him a beer when we beat him in a bar. Okay, but Keith Kellogg doesn't know anything about Russia. Nothing, zero, squat. He is repeating verbatim propaganda that's being spewed out by Ukraine. And we know it because of his casualty figures. 1 million with 700,000. He doesn't know anything. He's advising you on something he knows nothing about. If you want to know the casualties that Russia has lost, Mr. President, first of all, if you know Putin so well, call him up. Hey, how you been, guys? You're losing. He's not going to tell you, but I'll tell you, Mr. President, because, see, unlike Kellogg, I am a Russian expert. So I would say that the Russians have lost around 90,000 dead from the Ministry of Defense resources. On top of that, we can throw in another 30 or so thousand, 40,000 from the Donbass people's militias before they were absorbed by the Russians. Wagner lost another 10, 20, 30,000 guys. You have non-Ministry of Defense resources. So I think the overall death count, Mr. President, is up around 150, 160,000 Russian dead. Now, that's a lot, Mr. President, a whole bunch. I want you to chew on that number for a minute, Mr. President, because in 10 years in Vietnam, we lost 58. The war you avoided, Mr. President, we don't want to talk about that. 58,000 dead in 10 years. It nearly broke our nation. Okay, Russia has a population that's roughly half ours, and they've lost 150, 160,000 dead in 3 years. You don't see them whimpering or whining, do you, Mr. President? Russians aren't sitting there crying in their pretzels. They're crying. They go to funerals. But have you seen the Russian mothers come out and make statements, Mr. President? Don't make my son's sacrifice in vain. Win this war, Mr. President. They're talking about the real president, President Putin. There's no backing down here. Now, when we talk about mobilization potential, the Russians right now have about another 1 million men that they could rapidly mobilize without detrimentally impacting the workforce for their. So they have almost an infinite growth potential, whereas the Ukrainians, they, on the other hand, have suffered between 700 and 1.1 million dead, Mr. President. All right. So whoever's talking to you has their numbers wrong. They're throwing you out Ukrainian propaganda, and they've got, ask somebody, not Keith Kellogg, ask anybody but Keith Kellogg, what a war of attrition is, Mr. President. And you'll see that Russia is doing very well in this war of attrition. And it's not just about grinding down the numbers of Ukrainian soldiers. This is, I think, the fourth iteration of the Ukrainian army being destroyed and rebuilt by NATO at great expense, but also the material. I notice you're not talking about pouring equipment in there because maybe somebody's briefed you on the reality. We ain't got nothing left to send them. All right? There ain't nothing there. What are you going to send them? Nothing. The Russian military, rather than being weaker, is about 3.5, 4 times stronger today than it was when it started the special military operation. And it is extraordinarily combat experienced. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million men who have firsthand experience in high-intensity modern warfare. How many American soldiers have experience in high-intensity modern warfare? I'll give you a quick pro hint. 0. Okay, we have no experience in this. We don't do it anymore. We don't even train for it. We're barely starting to get back into the training business, but training in the real thing ain't quite the same, Mr. President. The bottom line is you've got it all wrong on Russia, 100% wrong on Russia, and you're setting yourself up for failure. And this will be not only a major policy failure now, but here's the thing, and I'm going to conclude with this because this is the one that nobody's telling you about, Mr. President. You say you want to avoid a nuclear war, and I believe you. I believe you do, because I think you do understand what the consequences of a nuclear conflict will be. Yeah. Fatal for everybody, including you and your family. Everybody will be dead. You get it. I know you do. The hard way. Are you talking about the strategic defeat of Russia? Because you know that is the current policy of the United States. You inherited that policy. The strategic defeat of Russia. Russia cannot be strategically defeated. Even if all the things you thought you could do could be done, and they can't. You put Russia's butt in a sling, put their back against the wall, and now we are talking about a nuclear war, the one you claim you don't want to avoid. You don't want to have occur. But that's not the problem. Let's think really big now, Mr. President. Vladimir Putin, he's in his 70s. He just won an election. He's going to govern for now, coming up on 5 more years. Then he could probably run for election one more time, 6 more years. It's Marine math. I'm not saying I'm the best mathematician in the world, but when you're a 70-year-old guy and you're adding on 11 years, he's in his 80s. That's it. Vladimir Putin may be healthy. He may be coherent. He may be everything that Joe Biden isn't. But when you get to be 80 years old, you're done. In fact, you should be done in your 70s, Mr. President. Yeah. That's okay. We'll give you a pass on this one. But ask yourself, Mr. President, who's going to replace Vladimir Putin? That's the million-dollar question. And that should be weighing on your mind. Because let me tell you this right now. If you want to peacefully coexist with Russia,
Putin's moderate.
You've got to find somebody to replace. And it's not you finding someone to replace Putin. You need to allow Russia to find somebody to replace Putin. Ask your people about what happened in the 90s, 93, 94, when we were trying to work with Russia to build democratic institutions. In fact, read the memorandum that just was declassified at the National Security Archive, written by the Charge d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in 1994. Mary, I think was his name, about the role played by the United States in destroying Russia's ability to build democratic institutions. See, it isn't Vladimir Putin that destroyed democracy in Russia. It's the United States that destroyed democracy in Russia. And we did it on purpose. We did it to economically dominate Russia, to politically dominate Russia. And then when Vladimir Putin came in and inherited the mess that we made, the destruction that destroyed Russia, as he sought to build these institutions, the CIA took advantage and turned every single potential opposition political party that could be going. And Putin said, I want an opposition. Democracy requires an opposition. But it's not an opposition when the enemy, that's us, Mr. President, buys them. When the CIA goes in and buys the opposition and uses the opposition not to create a adversarial democratic relationship, like it just between the Democrats and the Republicans here today in America. That's healthy. Have two sides going at each other. Putin was all in favor of that. But it doesn't work when the one side is being funded by the CIA not to create a healthier Russia, but to bring down Putin's regime. You see, we've been trying to bring down Vladimir Putin for 25 years, Mr. President. Hasn't worked. He's stronger today than he's ever been. The economy of Russia is stronger today than it's ever been. And that's because of Vladimir Putin. But Putin isn't immortal. I just did an event with a guy named Dmitry Trenin, and he's old-time Soviet hand, Russian hand, and he has the ear of Vladimir Putin. And he said that in the 2030s are going to be a very dangerous time for Russia and the world, because when Vladimir Putin steps aside, and he has to, the human body can't last forever, even if your name is Putin. If they don't have somebody to replace him, Russia is going to go into a period of deep political crisis. That will make them feel very vulnerable. And if you start something today, the hard way, you're not going to beat Russia. But what's going to happen is in the 2030s, a decade from now, remember, Mr. President, time flies fast. It was just, like 11 years ago that the Maidan took place. Everybody's talking about the Maidan today, and we understand that that is, one of the foundational things that got us to where we are today. But even 10 years before that was the color revolution. The CIA was was behind that, Mr. President. You might want to look into that one, where we tried to destroy Ukrainian democracy by bringing in Ukrainian nationalists. What I'm trying to say, Mr. President, is that time goes by relatively fast. And in a blink of an eye, we're going to be 11 years down the road, and Russia's going to be in a crisis, and we're going to be the adversary still seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. And at that point in time, we will be at a greater risk of nuclear war than you could possibly imagine. Do you want to avoid this, Mr. President? Then don't go the hard way. Be a strategic thinker here. Now's the time, as you indicated, to make a deal. There is a deal to be made. It's an easy deal. The Russians are ready for it, but it's a deal that has to recognize the Russian victory. This isn't a draw, not even close. And everything Russia wants is not only good for Russia, but good for European security that you claim you want. And it actually is good for the Ukrainian people because the current government has destroyed Ukraine. So make the deal, walk away from this thing the way you want to do. It's called the easy way. Take the easy path, and you're not only going to create the conditions for political victory for yourself, you might get the Nobel Peace Prize, but you also avoid that strategic problem that's going to come down 30 years from now, 10 years from now, in the 2030s. And you're supposed to be making America great again. If you're setting this up for a nuclear war with Russia in 10 years, that's not making America great again. That's just America being stupid all over it.
Yeah. Well, one thing, in defense of Trump, he had bone spurs for Vietnam. He didn't know which foot he had the bone spurs in, but he had bone spurs. So there was that.
Well, it does hurt. Bone spurs too.
Yeah, bone spurs. He said he got the bone spurs. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he said his Vietnam was dodging syphilis or something like that. Something insane that Donald Trump said on this angle. No, man, I agree with everything.
A lot of guys were doing it in Bangkok too on R&R. So yeah, I get it, Mr. President. Oh, but they wore uniforms, and when they finished dodging it, they went back to the front lines. It's okay, Mr. President. Keep going. You're convincing me here that you're quite the man.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with everything you said in that. I do you think? God, man, there's so much that you said right there that I agree with. I get the sense that, one, Putin wants to resolve this, meaning I don't think he wants to go to this kind of interregnum in 10 years. I think it's, no, I want to get a security architecture of Europe. This is my mission at this point. I'm going to resolve this very specific issue. I'm not going to let another generation have to deal with this. There's that part. On the other part, is there a strategy here? And the reason why I ask this, if you listen to Trump, you're getting this kind of weird vacillation where it sounds like he's saying two things. In one sense, NATO was always a red line. We have to, we need to pay attention to the Russians on this. This was always a problem. This was always bad. Then you get Marco Rubio going out saying we need to end this war. This war has been costly. We can't just give money ridiculously to Ukraine. And then you get this kind of flip where he's like, yeah, Russia has a failing economy. Forget the fact that Russia has surpassed Germany at this point in regards to economic output. I think they're like 4 or 5. They've leapfrogged Germany. Put that to the side, meaning put the bad details, the bad facts of history, all that stuff to the side. Is it possible that there's a play going on here of maximizing and also sympathizing, maximizing and sympathizing, this kind of back and forth, back and forth? I mean, granted, this is not Europe. Like I was pointing out earlier, it's one thing for Trump to say, well, I'm going to do this to Denmark. And Denmark's thing is, how high do you need my ass to be in this moment, Mr. President? Okay, well, that's a vassal. That's different. You're dealing with somebody who's just fundamentally destroyed NATO on the battlefield, that you have zero capacity to escalate on, short of going to some kind of nuclear war. So even if he's getting it wrong, do you think there's some kind of strategy at play here in the way that he's thinking about it, in this kind of vacillating back and forth between conciliatory, ultimatum? Conciliatory, ultimatum. What are your thoughts?
Look, there is I've said this, and I've been following some Russian blogs that have been saying something similar. Mm-hmm. There is the potential for a game being played. not Putin. Trump's whole thing is peace through strength. Trump has to be seen as being strong, has to be posturing. And so a lot of that post he put out, the hard way, I call it, that's puffing up your chest and doing this kind of thing, getting in your face and all that. First of all, he's not in Putin's face. Putin could care. Putin's back there doing a national security conference call where he says, "Hey, Trump won. Congratulations. We're ready to work with you. There's but just got to be realistically based. We're the potential there." But let's look at the other thing that Trump's doing here, because you can't view the Ukraine thing in isolation. There's NATO and there's Europe that are at play here. There's Ukraine that's at play here. Trump now has gone away from the 24-hour, I'm going to solve this thing with one magic phone call, to this is going to take time. He's given Keith Kellogg 100 days. Mm-hmm. You got 100 days, Keith, to fix this thing. Meanwhile, while Keith's got his 100 days, Trump's saying we're trying to line up a phone conversation with Putin as soon as possible. That's going to be inside that 100-day window. That phone call is more important than Keith Kellogg's 100 days, except for this. What's happening in that 100 days? See, I don't think Trump is going to sanction Putin in those 100 days. In fact, there might be some talk about lifting sanctions, et cetera. We know that the United States has come out, that Trump has come out and said, Zelensky, you're not getting the four territories back. You're not getting the Crimea back. Right. And Zelensky's at Davos crying in his beer. He's, no, we're not going to play. Zelensky, you're irrelevant. And also Zelensky's he's coming out with the fact that when this ends on Russia, Zelensky won't be there. Russia's already said, you got to go and we're going to replace you with somebody. That's the reality. So we're, Zelensky, no. If the rumors are true, Russia, Trump did sign an executive order that bans the foreign aid. It puts a freeze on foreign aid. But there are exceptions, and I think the Ukrainian aid comes into that exception. But there's also talk that he has basically told the Pentagon to freeze everything while we do a thing. If this is true, and I don't know if it is, but if it is true, he basically shut off aid to Ukraine. And over the course of 100 days, because it seems to be on a parallel one, Ukraine is going to wither on the vine. And then he turned around to NATO and said, you got to spend more, 5%. No, NATO will never meet the 5%. They've had trouble meeting the 2%. NATO can't meet the 5%. We see NATO states saying we're going to have to cut pensions and, we're going to have to cut welfare. We're going to have to cut all the social programs. That's economically, isn't socially, politically unviable. So NATO can never meet that standard. Ukraine isn't getting new equipment. And so what Trump is doing is setting up Ukraine and NATO for failure. And what he may be doing is tell Putin, you got 100 days to create the reality that you want for this war to be over. So in 100 days, do whatever you need to do to take whatever territory you need to take, to destroy whatever you need to destroy, to posture yourself wherever you need to be postured. And then we're going to end this thing. And in the meantime, I'll have confronted NATO with the fact that, they can't afford to be, it's like coming to a poker table, where the buy-in's, $100 billion and NATO's got $46.12 in their pocket. They can't sit down at this table. They don't have the ability. So there might be this kind of game being played right here where Trump is posturing and yet creating the conditions that will provide Russia with a window to get what it needs to get and then agree to this thing. But, the closure is another thing. There's no going to be frozen battlefield. Right. There's not going to be 200,000 peacekeepers, European peacekeepers, and that's not going to happen. The war will end the way Russia wants it to end, and Trump and Putin have to have this conversation. What I would do is take everything that comes out of this Trump White House with a grain of salt until the conversation with Putin takes place. That's the reality check that will have to happen for Trump. And after that phone conversation, That's when we judge what Trump does or doesn't do. And then we'll know whether or not he has a grand strategy or if he's just an idiot who thinks the hard way is the only way that he's going to get it. But there's the potential for such a grand strategy you're talking about. But again, none of it matters until he has the conversation with the only person that matters, who is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Yeah, I get the sense this may be a bit of posturing, but I agree with you. We got to see the phone call first. Speaking of European troops on the ground, I want to get your take on Zelensky. So he came out, and not just European peacekeepers. I mean, honestly, he looks like a desperate man at this point. Every time I've seen him, he's either begging for money, saying, oh, we're not getting enough money. Or in this case, I think he knows the bell is being rung at this point for him. I'm going to play this clip.
It's great if we will have troops. But we have to understand that the troops will not be in the center of the capital.
Yes.
They will not have relaxed time. Yes, it's very important because I heard that some allies said that, yes, but it's okay. We can be in the center of some city. And then, no, we don't need such contingent.
You want them at the front line?
Yes, with our people, of course. Yes, because this means security, and that's it. So, but it can't be. It can't be without the United States. I will explain you why. Even if some European friends think that it can be, no, it will not be. First of all, nobody will.
He wants U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine, and he believes that Russia is going to be okay with that. He is in a fantasy land, isn't he? I mean, this is outrageous.
Sometimes there's masterpieces on X, in the comments and all that. And I just wish I was clever enough, because I will tell you, when I saw that clip, the first thing that came to my mind is the actor in Goodfellas. At the end, when he's snorting cocaine like you wouldn't believe, and he's falling apart, and he's just twisting in the sky and looking at everything, and his eyes are like this, and he's only snorting cocaine. And I'm not being facetious here. That man's high on cocaine right there. Yeah. He's got the sniffles going, and he's just twitching, and his eyes are like this. That man is on drugs, literally on drugs. We've known he has a drug problem, but here it is. But he's just like the character at the end of the Goodfellas, where Ray
Liotta. Yeah, Ray Liotta.
That's him. But let's just talk about reality. Forget U.S. troops. The number of peacekeepers that are being touted out there is 200,000. Now, let me give you some reality here. One, NATO can't deploy 200,000 troops anywhere. They can't get 200,000 troops out of the barracks. But it's not 200,000. To do a rotation like that, just the way rotations work, you'll have 200,000 troops deployed. You'll have 200,000 troops training up. It's a 6-month rotation, tends to be. It's 200,000 troops training up to replace those 200,000. And then you have 200,000 troops on standby, on leave or whatever. Because remember, this is peacetime military. So that's 600,000. To have a peacekeeper force in Ukraine is 600,000 troops that NATO doesn't have. So this is just, again, the fantasy of Ray Liotta, Zelensky's little, desperate cocaine-fueled character at the end. It can't happen. The best NATO could probably do is crank out something in the area of 50 to 60,000 troops. But even then, now we're talking 150 to 180,000 dedicated troops. That means their sole mission becomes peacekeeping in Ukraine. And this is the time when NATO says, well, if we do that, we also have to prepare for Russia to, move in. We got to build up our military. And again, I'm just going to throw out two numbers, 2% and 5%. This is what, Trump has said. I'll throw another number there in a minute. 2% is the GDP level that NATO's supposed to be meeting now. They're not. Can't afford to. 5% is the level that Trump says they have to meet to do all this stuff. But to do something like this, you're talking 10 to 15% to afford everything that is out there. They can't do it. This is literally too much cocaine going into the bloodstream of a already desperate, crazy man. But people like Keith Kellogg are snorting the cocaine too. There's because remember there was that girl that was supplying him. She was snorting the cocaine, and everybody was snorting the cocaine, and he wasn't able to sell the cocaine because he was snorting.
Right.
So everybody around Zelensky and everybody who's advising the president is snorting cocaine. It's Ukrainian disinformation designed to make you feel that Russia's being beaten, all this stuff. But why in God's name would America spend another dime on this cokehead, on this man who has killed over 1 million of his own people, a man who doesn't have a plan? His only plan is you come save me at your expense.
Yep.
I mean, we need to flush Zelensky down the toilet of life as quick as possible. This man has destroyed his country. He's destroying our economy. He's already destroyed Europe. Europe is a basket case. And Trump is going to finish the job of destroying Europe. NATO isn't going to survive this decade. That's my prediction. Because the conditions that's Trump setting for the continued viability of NATO cannot be reached by NATO. And at that point in time, Trump will say, well, then maybe we don't want to have anything because we're not going to underwrite it. The United States isn't going to underwrite NATO. So it's the end of NATO. It's the end of the European Union. Trump is rejecting everything about the European Union. So Zelensky lives in a coke-fueled, never land. He's irrelevant. The problem is he speaks. This clip gets on there. Americans look at that. They take it seriously, and then Keith Kellogg fuels it by saying stupidity, and then Trump throws out a tweet that talks about the hard way, and we begin to think that that's reality. Mm-hmm. Reality is something totally different. And if you're not following Russia, look, the Russian economy, is it the healthiest economy in the world? No. Have sanctions had an impact on the Russian economy? Yes.
But it's like number 4.
The head of the Russian bank, this lady whose name I can't pronounce, she admits that Russia has to play games to keep the economy. Russia's inflation right now is around 9%, 9.1%. That's high. You don't want 9.1%. But again, everybody's like, that's the end of Russia. Do you know what Russian inflation was in 2000 when Vladimir Putin took over? 2,000%. Wow. Now, again, I'm just a simple Marine. Wow. But 9% and 2,000% are totally different economic realities. Russia's playing. Do you think the Americans could do what Russia has done with its defense industry, the mobilization of defense industry, the shifting of economic focus away from the West to the East in 3 years? Remember, 3 years ago, Russia was focused on the West until we sanctioned them. They've transitioned to the East. They've mobilized their defense industry, and they have a high standard of living in Russia. Do you think there's any nation on this planet that could have done that? And the answer is no. All right, they did it. But they've got a supercharged economy right now, 9% inflation. It may go up to 10%. It may go up to 12%. It's a problem but it's not the end of the world kind of problem.
Right.
The end of the world kind of problem is 2,000% inflation. Russia's not going back there. And Russia has built an economic plan designed to sustain this for at least another 2 to 3 years, meaning they're ready for this conflict to go on till 2028. They've made all the decisions. They got a plan, Mr. President. We don't have a plan. You're walking into their trap because your presidency, with all due respect to your belief in your own immortality, wins in 4 years. Okay, they're ready to walk this through at least 3 of those 4 years, and they could extend it to another one. Putin will outlast you, Mr. President, and he'll probably, if you go down this route, he'll probably outlast. If J.D. Vance wins the presidency after you, he'll outlast him because Vance will be a 4-year president because you'll become a failed president. You're just setting yourself up for failure. Putin's going to outlast you all because he has a plan.
Let me ask you. Oh, no, please.
I'm just saying that, one of the things in the military, they taught me, you might have learned this, Mr. President, had you not had bone spurs. I'm sorry about your bone spurs. It's a tragedy. But if you had gone in the military, you might have learned something about what they call the OODA loop. And it's basically getting inside the enemy's decision-making cycle. OODA is observe, orient, decide, act. John Boyd came up with, he's a fighter pilot, and it was his way. I think they call him 30-second Boyd, and he could go head-to-head with you in a fight, and then by making moves, he'd get you to react until he was in a superior position, he'd shoot you down. And so we take that and we apply it to a whole bunch of things. On the battlefield, the Marine Corps, the way we did maneuver warfare was to get inside the enemy's decision-making cycle, to initiate action in a way that compelled the enemy to respond the way we were designing it to be, so that the battlefield unfolded the way we wanted it to unfold, and we imposed our will on the enemy. Putin has a plan, which means if you don't have a plan, you're reacting to his plan. You just lost, Mr. President. You see, in the OODA loop cycle thing, if you're reacting to the other guy, you're losing. You're that pilot that's going to get shot down. Putin has a plan. You're reacting to his plan. What you need to do, Mr. President, is get Russia to react to your plan. All right? They've already built into their system everything you think you're going to do, because the Russians are smarter than you, Mr. President. They've anticipated everything you think you can do to them. Just ask the people that thought they were going to shut down Russia's ability to sell oil by making it impossible for them to ensure their shipping. Instantly, Russia has a ghost fleet of tankers. How did that happen, Mr. President? Oh, they anticipated. They are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 20 or 100 steps ahead of you, Mr. President. You will never catch up if you're playing this game. All right? Because it's their game. You need to change that game. Not to defeat them, but to ensure that we don't be defeated. You want to get ahead of them, make them react to you. Tell Putin, I agree to everything you just said. Oh, yeah. The Russians are in a panic there, man, because they don't have a plan for that. They don't have a plan for success on this one because they don't anticipate success.
Oh, that's a good point.
Get ahead of them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Say, because you know what you want, Mr. President. You want out of Europe. You want out. The best way to do this, is to give the Russians what they want up front. Because now what happens is Russia they have to deal with success. Now the next step, they're reacting to you, Mr. President. You put the proposal on the table. You make the Russians respond to your initiative. And suddenly you're in charge of redefining U.S.-Russian relations. And if you do it smartly, they're not going into a trap that's to their detriment. You both are going down a path that can lead to better relations, but on terms set by the United States that are to the benefit of the United States. That's what you need to do, Mr. President. You need to be smarter than this puffery, chest-puffing nonsense that's going on right now. You're not going to intimidate Vladimir Putin. What you can do is take advantage of the fact that Russia is geared right now towards conflict. And by offering them legitimate peace, you're now in control of the agenda. That's what I would be doing, Mr. President.
Scott, I get the sense that Putin wants something more than just ending the war. I get the sense he wants this kind of new security architecture of Europe. What does that look like in practice? Well,
the Russians have already told us, because they published draft treaties. They gave it to us on December 17th, 2021. The draft treaty to NATO, the draft treaty to the United States, and it's basically setting up a European security framework that respects Russia's spheres of influence. The problem is that treaty was given to NATO before the special military operation. Mm-hmm. There's a new reality right now. One of those realities is that NATO is not going to be here much longer. And so when we speak of a European security framework, it has to be a post-NATO framework or an extremely diminished NATO framework. And Russia, again, will have the advantage if we go down there unless we preempt them with some sort of thing. But you're right. The special military operation is just a tactic to a larger strategic objective of stability, which is the direction Russia wants to go. Stability that has Russia peacefully coexisting with Europe in a new non-partner relationship. Russia's not looking to be friends or partners with Europe. They used to be, but Russia's made the big pivot. That's why BRICS is such a big deal. But a European security framework is one where there can be economic interaction. Russian energy will be available for Europe, if they want it. But Europe is not going to pour back into the Russian economy and control major aspects of the Russian economy. There can be European investment, but it'll be controlled investment. It'll be a healthier relationship. Russia's relationship with the West up until the special military operation was a very unhealthy relationship because it was the abusive relationship that was begun in the 1990s when we were seeking to, control Russia, to break Russia apart. Russia's not. This is like, if you were in an abusive relationship with a girl and you guys broke up, and now she says, well, we can be friends again, but there's new rules. The rules are
right.
I'm not playing your game anymore. You don't get to abuse me anymore. But maybe we had a child in joint custody, but you're going to have custody under my rules and all that kind of stuff. That's it. I mean, I hate to make Russia the woman in this, but we abused Russia. We really did. We were an abusive. We were bad friends, horrible friends, because we're never really friends with Russia. We always want to exploit Russia. Russia's willing to be friends, but it has to be a genuine friendship that isn't based upon one side seeking to dominate the other. And so, I think Russia's willing to bring us into the friend zone, but not anything. There's not going to be a relationship. Okay, that's it. We go into the friend zone, but you're not going to get all the things that you used to get from Russia. Those days are done. Russia's moved on.
Yeah. Let me ask you this before we close up. We have about 6 minutes, give or take. I want to get your take on the ceasefire deal for Israel, the quote unquote ceasefire. And, Witkoff, I believe his name, goes over there, basically reads right out in a very salty language. In order to get the deal, it was the deal that was on the table for the last year that nobody moved on because Joe Biden wasn't really pushing for any kind of deal at all behind the scenes. We're finding out. But Trump gets the ceasefire. Trump is asked whether or not he thinks the ceasefire is going to last. He was like, I'm not sure. This isn't my war. It's not, this isn't really any of my business. So Netanyahu, who is dealing with many in Israel being pissed off that he accepted this deal, or at the very least was pushed into this deal, came out and he said this, and I want to get your take on it. Because according to Netanyahu, Donald Trump, and for that matter, Joe Biden, made the deal that they can reinvigorate the war at any moment, meaning at any time that they want, they can resume the war. And I want to get your take on this comment. If I can get this, it's going to be too loud. There we go.
Was elected, Trump was completely committed to the release of the hostages. We spoke on Wednesday. He congratulated me on the agreement, and he emphasized, and rightly so, that the first stage is a temporary ceasefire. This is what he said, a temporary ceasefire. Towards the next stages of the agreement, we are holding on to some significant assets so that we can bring back all of the hostages, and in order to accomplish all the goals of the war. Both President Trump and President Biden have provided full backing to Israel's right to resume fighting, to resume combat, if Israel reaches the conclusion that the negotiations over the second stage are pointless. I truly appreciate that. I also appreciate the decision of President Trump to lift all the remaining restrictions on the providing of essential.
I have a hard time listening to him, if I'm being honest. Give me your take on this. I mean, do you give any real validity to the ceasefire? Do you think there's any lasting quality to it? I mean, when I was listening to Steve, the guy who went over there, Witkoff, or I may be getting the name wrong, he sounded like he was serious about, on some level, pushing this deal through. Is this bluster by Netanyahu, or no? This is the reality of events, where this is a temporary ceasefire. They're going to go back to operations the moment that they get their hostages back. What are your thoughts? And we have about 4 minutes.
I mean, have you ever watched a coach of a losing team try and explain how he won the game, even though he didn't win the game? You know, we had a solid blocking, and we had this, and we've got future depth and all that. That's Netanyahu. It's pure spin. There's no doubt in my mind that Trump told Netanyahu that if Hamas violates this, that Israel can go back in. There's no doubt in my mind he said it, but it's not any time Israel wants to, and this. No, Trump. Let me tell you why this is a real ceasefire. Because Trump's a strategic thinker in the Middle East. See, this ceasefire solves the problem of the Houthi. It solves the problem of Hezbollah, because both Hezbollah and the Houthis' engagement with Israel was because of the refusal of Israel to have a ceasefire. Okay, that ceasefire is in place. It also takes Iran out of the picture. See, Trump isn't looking for a broader conflict in the Middle East. He's looking to end the conflict in the Middle East. And to do that, he has to be able to negotiate with Iran, because he wants to negotiate with Iran. We know he wants to negotiate with Iran. He wants a better nuclear deal. That's his strategic focus, and he's not going to let Benjamin Netanyahu screw this up for him. So Netanyahu can spin this any way he wants. And if Hamas wants to violate this, but I don't know. Did you look at the videos that came out of Gaza?
Yes.
Of the defeated Hamas? I mean, man, they look tough, because they were all beat up and they had the white flags and they were bleeding. Their uniforms were ripped up and their weapons were, oh no, they looked like they were well fed, and they were stuffed, that studs with the green headbands, and they were running around. That wasn't a defeated military, guys. That's a victorious military that took on one of the world's largest, most sophisticated, Western militaries and fought them to a standstill. Hamas was supposed to have been physically destroyed by Israel. That wasn't a physically destroyed fighting force. And you also have to remember, in the lead up to the ceasefire, Israel was taking very heavy casualties in Gaza. The Israeli army does not want to go back to Gaza. That would be a disaster for them. So I think you're going to see that there isn't going to be violation. We're seeing that Israel has been given sort of a green light to go into the West Bank to clean up issues there. That's separate. But Gaza itself, I think you're going to see, is going to get into the business of reconstruction, rebuilding, etc. It's not a perfect solution, but I don't see this as being a game by Trump. I think Trump is serious about a ceasefire because it anchors what he wants to do strategically in the region. And I think Trump is going to hold Netanyahu's feet to the fire. And I think Hamas understands that as long as they, do what they've committed to do, and I think they're serious about doing that, they come out stronger. Hamas is not politically destroyed; they're not militarily defeated. And Hamas is basically the driving force behind the Palestinian movement today. On October 6th, Hamas was fading fast, being isolated, pushed to the side, forgotten. Completely different reality today. Tragically, it had to take, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 Palestinian lives to make this happen. But I think you're going to see that Gaza will never again be an open-air prison camp. That Gaza is going to be rebuilt in the vision of the Palestinians of Gaza, and it's going to be part of a new approach towards the creation of a Palestinian state, that now the world, because the other thing that's changed is the world's opinion of Israel has changed, because Israel has been exposed as a genocidal state. So I think that, this isn't 100%. Nobody trusts Israel. I don't trust Israel. And, but I do think we need to understand that Trump isn't the compliant tool of Zionism that everybody thought he was. That Trump has a vision that benefits the United States of America first. And that vision is peace. He needs to have stability in the Middle East so that he can redirect his attention elsewhere. And that stability can't happen unless there's a ceasefire that holds in Gaza.
From your mouth to God's ears, Scott. Man, thank you for this, Scott. Really appreciate you, man. Always appreciate talking to you. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. You can follow Scott on Telegram at Scott Ritter. Thank you for this, Scott. Always, like I said, I always appreciate talking to you, man. I really like your point of view. Have a good one, man. All right. I would like to go to my next guest.